There is a woman in the family tree of Jesus who never should have been allowed near it. Not because she did anything wrong, because of where she was born. She came from a nation the law of Israel singled out by name and shut out in writing for 10 generations. And her name is sitting right there in the opening chapter of the New Testament anyway. Think about how strange that is. Matthew opens his gospel with a genealogy, a long march of fathers and sons from Abraham down to the Messiah. 42 generations, almost every single name in it is a man. But 4 times, the list stops and does something it was never supposed to do. It names a woman, and the third of those 4 women is a foreigner, a widow from Moab, the country whose people the book of Deuteronomy says may not enter the assembly of the Lord. She has no money, no husband, no child, and no right, on paper, to belong. And within 3 generations, her great-grandson is the greatest king Israel ever had. So this video is going to do something simple and something almost nobody does with this story. We are going to read the whole book of Ruth the way it was actually written, one careful move at a time, and watch exactly how a woman the law wanted to keep out became the hinge the entire royal line, and then the line of Jesus swings on. 10 movements, each one a decision, or an accident, or a loophole that had to fall exactly right. Or David is never born, and the family tree at the front of the New Testament reads completely differently. And by the time we reach the 10th, you will understand why the people who arranged the Bible put this quiet little story of grain and grief right where they did, and why 1,000 years after she lived, someone writing the ancestry of the Messiah decided her name had to be in it. Let's get into it. Nobody in Bethlehem was watching the road that led out toward Moab. There was nothing to watch. People did not leave Bethlehem for Moab. You went the other way, if you went at all. But one family packed up and took that road east anyway, and everything that follows, the king, the Psalms, the line that runs all the way to a manger, starts with that one wrong direction journey. The book opens in the days when the judges ruled, which is the Bible's way of telling you this is a rough, lawless, every man for himself stretch of history, and there is a famine in the land. Now hold on to the name of the town they are leaving, because it is the first quiet joke the story tells, and it is a bitter one. The town is Bethlehem. In Hebrew, Beth-Lechem. It means, literally, house of bread. The house of bread has run out of bread. That is how bad the famine is. The one place whose very name promises food cannot feed its own people. So a man named Elimelech takes his wife and his 2 sons and leaves the house of bread to go survive in the fields of Moab. And the names here are doing work, the way names always do in this book, so let me give them to you. The father is Elimelech, which means my God is king. The mother is Naomi, which means pleasant, or sweet, or lovely. Remember that one especially, pleasant, because the story is going to do something cruel to it later. And the 2 sons are called Mahlon and Chilion, names that old Jewish tradition connected to sickness and to wasting away, which, for 2 young men who are about to die young in a foreign country, is not exactly a hopeful start. Now, Moab is not a random destination, and this is the part most retellings skip right past, so stay with me, because it matters enormously for everything that comes next. Moab was not a neutral neighbor. Moab was one of Israel's oldest and most bitter enemies. The 2 nations had history, the ugly kind, and the origin of Moab, written down in the book of Genesis, is one of the most disturbing stories in the whole Bible. When the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, Lot escaped with his 2 daughters. And those daughters, believing the world had ended and there were no men left, got their father drunk and conceived children by him. The son of the older daughter was named Moab. He became the father of the Moabite people. So when this Israelite family crosses into Moab to survive, they are not just crossing a border. They are walking into the land of the enemy, a people with a shameful origin and a long grudge, and they are about to marry into it. Because that is exactly what happens next. Elimelech dies first, in Moab, far from home. Naomi is left with her 2 sons, and those 2 sons marry local women, Moabite women. One is named Orpah, the other is named Ruth, and there she is. The woman whose name is in the front of the New Testament. The first time we meet her, she is nobody. A foreign girl in a backwater, married into a family of refugees, in a story that has so far produced one funeral and no future. There is no hint, none, that she matters. The text just drops her name and moves on. But watch what happens to this family in the space of a single sentence. Because the famine drove them to Moab to escape death, and death followed them there anyway. Within a few short verses, Naomi is going to lose absolutely everything, and the story is going to hand its entire weight to a foreign widow nobody has any reason to care about. 10 years pass in Moab, and in that 10 years, the story empties Naomi's whole life out. Her husband is already gone, and then, in one flat, devastating line, the text tells us that both of her sons die too. Mahlon and Chilion, gone. No cause given, no deathbed seen, nothing. Just the bare fact of it. Sit in how total that is for a woman in the ancient world. Naomi has no husband and no sons, which means she has no income, no protection, no legal standing, and no one to carry the family name forward. In that time and place, a widow with no living men in her family was one of the most vulnerable human beings alive. And she is all of this in a foreign country, far from home, with nothing left but 2 foreign daughters-in-law who are now widows themselves. 3 women standing at 3 graves with no future between them. Then word reaches Naomi that the famine back home has finally broken. The house of bread has bread again. So she decides to go back to Bethlehem, to her own people, to die where she came from. And Orpah and Ruth start out on the road with her. But somewhere on that road, Naomi stops and turns to these 2 young women and does something genuinely selfless. She tells them to go home. She tells them to go back to their mother's houses, back to Moab, back to a chance at new husbands and new lives. She has nothing to offer them. She cannot give them more sons to marry. Following an old, penniless widow to a country where they would be despised foreigners is throwing their lives away, and Naomi knows it. So she blesses them, and she kisses them, and she tells them to leave her, and all 3 of them break down, weeping on the road. And here is the first real hinge of the entire story, because this is where the 2 young widows split. Orpah, after much crying, after protesting that she wants to stay, finally listens to reason. She kisses her mother-in-law goodbye, and she turns around, and she goes back to Moab. And honestly, nobody could blame her. She did the sensible thing. She did the thing you or I would probably tell a friend to do. She chose the future that made sense. But Ruth would not go. The text uses a very specific, very physical Hebrew word here. It says, Ruth clung to Naomi. It is the same word used elsewhere in the Bible for a man cleaving to his wife. For a bond you cannot pull apart. And then Ruth opens her mouth, and she says the words that made this book famous, the words people still read at weddings and funerals 3,000 years later, without ever realizing they are quoting the vow of a Moabite widow to her broken mother-in-law on a road out of the land of Moab. "Do not urge me to leave you," she says. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Only death will separate you and me." Read that again and notice what she is actually giving up. She is not just promising to keep an old woman company. She is renouncing her own nation, Moab. She is renouncing the gods of Moab and binding herself to the God of Israel. She is choosing to become a foreigner for the rest of her life, to walk into a country that has every reason to reject her, and to take on the poverty and the danger of an old widow who has openly told her there is nothing in it for her. This is one of the purest acts of loyalty in the entire Bible, and it is being performed by exactly the person the audience has been trained to look down on. The Moabite. There is a word for what Ruth just did, a huge word in the Hebrew Bible, and it is going to run underneath this entire story like a current. The word is hesed. It means loyal love, covenant kindness, the kind of faithfulness that keeps its promises even when it costs everything and even when nobody is making you. Ruth just showed hesed to Naomi. And keep your eye on that word, because the whole plot from here is going to be one act of hesed answering another, until it builds something neither woman could possibly have planned. But before any of that can pay off, the two of them have to actually arrive. And when Naomi finally walks back into Bethlehem after 10 years away, empty-handed, with a Moabite girl at her side, the whole town is going to come out to look. And the first thing Naomi does, back in the house of bread, is stand in the street and change her own name. The two women reach Bethlehem right at the beginning of the barley harvest. Hold on to that detail, the harvest, because it is about to become the stage for everything. But first, the homecoming, and it is not a happy one. Naomi walks back into her hometown after 10 years, and the text says the whole town was stirred because of them. The women of Bethlehem look at this worn-down figure and can barely believe it. "Is this Naomi?" they ask. "Is this really her?" This is a woman they remember. She left as a wife and a mother, part of a whole family, with a husband and 2 sons and a future. She has come back a widow with no children, leading a foreign girl, carrying nothing. And Naomi answers them with one of the most raw, honest lines any character speaks in the Bible. She says, "Do not call me Naomi. Do not call me pleasant. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." There is that name doing its work. She was named Pleasant, and she stands in the street and says, "That name is a lie now. Do not use it. I am bitterness itself." That Hebrew root, ma, bitter, is an old and loaded one. It is the same root behind Mara, the bitter water Israel found in the desert when they were dying of thirst. Naomi is reaching for the deepest word she has for a life that has gone sour. "I went away full," she says, "and the Lord has brought me back empty." And here is the part that should stop you. Standing right next to Naomi while she says the word empty is Ruth, the woman who just gave up her entire nation and her entire future to be there. Naomi says she came back with nothing, and there is a person of extraordinary loyalty standing at her elbow. And in her grief, Naomi cannot see her yet. That is how heavy loss can sit on a person. It can blind them to the one good thing still standing beside them. The story is quietly telling you that Naomi does not yet understand what she has. But we do, and we are meant to feel the gap. Now, before we follow these two into what comes next, I have to stop and put the single most important fact about Ruth right in front of you, because without it, the rest of the story is just a nice tale about a kind girl. With it, the story becomes almost scandalous. And it is this: Ruth is a Moabite. The text will not let you forget it either. Over and over, it does not just call her Ruth. It calls her Ruth the Moabite. Ruth the Moabitess. It keeps rubbing the label in on purpose. And to feel why that is such a problem, you have to know what the law of Israel actually said about her people. Open the book of Deuteronomy chapter 23, and you find a line that lands like a slammed door. No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even to the 10th generation, because of how they treated Israel on the way out of Egypt. Read the plain words of that, and Ruth does not belong. She is exactly the kind of person that verse was written to keep out. A Moabite, by name, shut out of the congregation of Israel. And yet, this is the woman the entire book is about to lift up as its hero. This is the woman whose loyalty will be praised by the elders of Bethlehem at the city gate. This is the woman whose name is going to end up in the family tree of Israel's greatest king, and then in the family tree of the Messiah. The law says, keep her out. The story is about to walk her all the way in. And the collision between those two things is the real engine of everything that follows. So how does a penniless Moabite widow, legally an outsider, actually survive in Bethlehem, let alone rise? She does the only thing she can do. The next morning she goes out to beg for scraps in a stranger's field. And by pure accident, or something that looks exactly like pure accident, she walks into the one field in all of Bethlehem that changes her life. The morning after the homecoming, Ruth does not sit around waiting to be rescued. She goes to Naomi and asks permission to go out and glean. And to understand what gleaning is, you have to understand one of the quietly beautiful laws buried in the Hebrew Bible. The law of Israel, in Leviticus and again in Deuteronomy, commanded landowners not to harvest their fields all the way to the edges and not to go back and pick up what they dropped. Whatever the reapers missed, whatever fell, they were to leave on the ground, and it was to be left specifically for 4 groups of people: the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner. Ruth, remarkably, is 3 of those 4 at once. She is poor, she is a widow, and she is a foreigner. If any law in Israel was written with this exact woman in mind, it was this one: a built-in welfare system, a way for the most vulnerable people in the society to feed themselves with dignity by working the leftovers of the harvest. But here is the quiet gamble hidden inside that generous law. It tells a landowner to leave the corners of his field. It does not tell a starving foreign widow which field to walk into. Where Ruth ends up gleaning is left completely to chance, and the chance she is about to stumble into is the kind that rewrites an entire family tree. So Ruth goes out to glean, to follow behind the reapers and gather whatever they leave. And then the text says something that, in Hebrew, is almost a wink at the reader. It says her chance chanced upon a field belonging to a man named Boaz. The wording is deliberately, almost comically casual. It piles up the language of coincidence. She just so happened, by pure luck, to end up in this particular field, as if it were random. Except the story does not believe in random, and neither, by now, do you. Because of all the fields around Bethlehem, this one belongs to a man named Boaz, and Boaz, we are immediately told, is a relative of Naomi's dead husband, Elimelech, a member of the family. If you are wondering how much of a coincidence that really is, so is the narrator, who is clearly enjoying himself. The whole point of drowning the sentence in the language of chance is to make you feel the hand underneath it. Ruth thinks she stumbled into a random field. She stumbled into the one field that could redeem her entire situation. And Boaz notices her almost at once. He arrives at his own field, greets his workers with a blessing, and immediately spots the stranger. "Who is that young woman?" he asks the man in charge of the reapers. And the foreman tells him, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi." There it is again, that label, Moabite, the first thing anyone says about her. She asked to glean, the foreman says, and she has been on her feet, working since morning, barely resting. Now watch what Boaz does, because this is the moment his character is set, and it is the answer to Ruth's loyalty. He does not have her removed. He does not treat her as an unwelcome foreigner exploiting his field. He walks over to her, and he goes far past the letter of the law. He tells her to stay in his field, to glean here and nowhere else, to keep close to his own workers where she will be safe. He tells his young men not to touch her, not to bother her, which quietly tells you what a vulnerable foreign woman gleaning alone might normally have faced. He tells her to drink from his water jars whenever she is thirsty, and when she falls on her face and asks him why is he showing kindness to a foreigner, he gives an answer that ties the whole book together. "I have heard," Boaz says, "everything you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband died, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know." And then he says this, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." I need you to lock that image away, the wings, because it is not just a pretty phrase. That Hebrew word, kanaf, means a wing, but it also means the corner or the hem of a garment. Boaz says Ruth has come to shelter under the wings of the God of Israel. And in a few chapters, on a dark threshing floor at midnight, Ruth is going to take that exact word and hand it right back to him and turn a blessing into a proposal. But that is getting ahead of the story. For now, a foreign widow has found one safe field and one kind man. What she does not know yet is who this kind man actually is and what he is legally able to do for a family with no men left. Ruth goes home that first evening, staggering under the weight of what she has gathered. Boaz has been so generous, has told his workers to deliberately pull out extra stalks and leave them for her, that she brings back an enormous amount of grain, far more than a day of gleaning should produce. And when Naomi sees it, she is stunned. "Where did you glean today?" she asks. "Whose field were you in?" And when Ruth says the name Boaz, something wakes up in Naomi for the first time since the graves in Moab, because Naomi knows exactly who Boaz is. "That man," she tells Ruth, "is a close relative of ours." And then she uses a word that is about to become the key to the whole plot. She says, "He is one of our redeemers." We are going to unpack that word, redeemer, in detail very soon, because it carries the entire ending. But feel the shift in the room first. A moment ago, Naomi was a woman with no future, telling the whole town to call her bitter. Now she has heard one name, and she is thinking again. There is a family member, a man of standing, and her foreign daughter-in-law has, by pure chance that is not chance at all, landed directly in his field and won his favor. For the first time, Naomi sees a thread she might be able to pull. But before we follow that thread onto the threshing floor, I have to show you something hidden in Boaz himself, a detail the book of Ruth never tells you, that only gets revealed 1,000 years later at the front of the New Testament. And it is one of the best-kept secrets in this entire story. It is the question of who Boaz's mother was. The book of Ruth just calls Boaz a worthy man of Bethlehem and moves on, but when Matthew sits down to write the genealogy of Jesus, he lists the line like this: Salmon was the father of Boaz, and then he adds two words the Old Testament genealogies almost never bother with. He names the mother. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Rahab. If you know your Bible, that name should make you sit up, because Rahab was not an Israelite either. Rahab was the woman of Jericho, a Canaanite, a prostitute, who hid the Israelite spies when they came to scout the city before its walls came down. She was an outsider and a scandal in every possible sense, and she was welcomed into Israel because of her faith and her courage. And according to Matthew, that woman was Boaz's mother. Now look at what is actually happening on that threshing floor about to unfold. You have Boaz, the son of Rahab, a foreign woman who was brought into Israel and shown mercy. And he is falling for Ruth, a foreign woman who needs to be brought into Israel and shown mercy. The son of one outsider is the perfect man to redeem another outsider. He is not looking down at Ruth from a safe distance. He is looking at his own mother's story. Some things run in families. In this family, what runs is the habit of grace toward the stranger, and that habit is about to build a king. So this is where the story stops being about survival and starts being about a plan. Naomi has a redeemer in view. Ruth has a protector who already admires her. The barley harvest is giving way to the wheat harvest. The season is closing, and the window to act is closing with it. And Naomi, the woman who called herself bitter, is about to prove she is also one of the shrewdest strategists in the Bible, because she is going to send Ruth in the dark to the one place a respectable woman had no business going at night, the threshing floor. And what she tells Ruth to do there has puzzled and scandalized readers for 3,000 years. So here is where the story gets bold and a little dangerous. The harvest is ending. Naomi knows that once it is over, Ruth's daily contact with Boaz ends too, and the window closes. So Naomi makes a plan, and it is not a shy one. She tells Ruth to wash, to put on perfume, to dress in her best clothes, and to go down to the threshing floor at night, where Boaz will be sleeping beside his grain to guard it from thieves, as landowners did at harvest. And then Naomi's instructions get very specific and very risky. Do not let him know you are there, she says, until he has finished eating and drinking. Watch where he lies down, then go and uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Now, let me be honest with you about this scene, because it has made readers uncomfortable for 3,000 years, and pretending it hasn't would be dishonest. A young woman, secretly at night, going to where a man is sleeping after he has been eating and drinking, and uncovering him and lying down. The language is loaded. Several of the Hebrew words in this passage, the word for feet, the word for lie down, can carry a second suggestive meaning elsewhere in the Bible, and the writer clearly knows it. The scene is built to feel charged with risk. Naomi is gambling Ruth's entire reputation on this. If it goes wrong, if anyone sees, Ruth is finished, branded exactly the way people already expect a Moabite woman to behave. But here is what actually happens, and it is the opposite of what the setup makes you brace for. Ruth goes down and does exactly as Naomi said. Boaz eats, drinks, feels good, and lies down at the end of the grain pile. Quietly, Ruth comes, uncovers his feet, and lies down. And in the middle of the night, something startles him. He wakes, and there is a woman lying there. "Who are you?" he says into the dark. "And this is the moment," Ruth answers, and she does not just give her name. She turns Boaz's own blessing into a request, using the exact word he used in the field. "I am Ruth, your servant," she says. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, for you are a redeemer." There is the payoff to the word I told you to lock away. In the field, Boaz had blessed Ruth by saying she had come to take refuge under the wings of God. Now, on the threshing floor, Ruth says, "All right then, you be those wings. Spread your wing, your garment, over me. Be the shelter you prayed God would give me." It is a marriage proposal, and it is also a theological masterstroke. She is asking him to be in the flesh, the refuge he asked God to be. This foreign woman, the supposed outsider, understands the God of Israel and the language of covenant better than almost anyone in the book. She takes his own pious blessing and calls him to answer it himself. And Boaz is not offended. He is overwhelmed. "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter," he says. "This kindness is greater than the first. You have not run after younger men, whether poor or rich." And there it is, the word again, hesed, the loyal kindness. He sees that Ruth is not seeking her own comfort. She is still, even now, acting to redeem the family of her dead husband and her mother-in-law, choosing duty and loyalty over the easier path of a young husband. And Boaz, a man who, by the hints in the text, is considerably older than her, is stunned that she would choose him and this whole burden. But then Boaz says something that turns the whole night on its head and threatens the entire happy ending just as it seems to arrive. "Yes," he says, "I am a redeemer. But there is a problem. There is another redeemer, a man more closely related to your family than I am. And by law, he gets the first right. So before I can be your refuge, I have to deal with a man who stands ahead of me in line. And that man might say yes." Quick thing before Boaz reaches that gate, because we are right at the turn of the whole story. If you are finding this deeper than the version you were handed, subscribe, because we are not stopping with Ruth. In 2 videos, we go back one more link in this exact bloodline, to the other scandalous woman the elders of Bethlehem are about to name at the gate, Tamar, whose gamble was even bolder than the one you just watched on the threshing floor. You will not want to miss where that one leads. Now, to the gate. To feel the tension of what happens next, you have to understand this idea of the Redeemer, because it is the machine the whole ending runs on. And it is a genuinely strange and beautiful piece of ancient lore. The Hebrew word is goel. It is usually translated kinsman redeemer. And a goel was a specific thing in Israelite society. He was your nearest male relative, and the law gave him a set of duties toward you, especially when things fell apart. If you got so poor you had to sell your family land, the goel was supposed to buy it back, to keep it in the family. If you were sold into slavery, the goal was supposed to buy your freedom. The Redeemer was the built-in safety net, the family member legally responsible for rescuing his own from ruin. To redeem meant to pay the price to get back what was lost. But there was a second, deeper layer, and this is the one that matters for Ruth. There was an old custom, spelled out in the law, that if a man died without a son, his brother or nearest relative was supposed to marry the widow. and the first son she bore would legally count as the dead man's son, so his name and his line would not be blotted out of Israel. It sounds strange to us. But in a world with no afterlife guarantee and where a man lived on through his descendants and his land, to die with no heir was to be truly erased. The Redeemer existed to stop that erasure, to give the dead man a future he could not give himself. And keep that word close, Redeemer, because it cuts both ways. The same law that lets Boaz rescue Ruth is about to hand another man a perfectly legal way to walk away from her without lifting a finger. But we are not there quite yet. So look at what Ruth actually asked for on that threshing floor. She was not just asking Boaz to marry her because she was lonely. She was asking him to be the goal, to buy back Elimelech's lost land, and to marry her, the widow of Elimelech's son, so that her dead husband Mahlon's name and line would continue. She was asking Boaz to redeem an entire dead family from being erased at real cost to himself. And if you are wondering why a man would take on someone else's debt, someone else's widow, and raise a son who would legally belong to another man's name, well, so was everyone else. That is exactly the loophole the rival is about to use to escape. Because Boaz, being an honorable man, does not just grab what he wants. He goes straight to the town gate, which in the ancient world was the courthouse, the place where legal business was done in front of witnesses, and he waits, and sure enough, the nearer Redeemer, the man ahead of him in line, comes walking by. Boaz calls him over, sits him down, gathers 10 of the town elders as witnesses, and lays a trap so smooth you can almost miss it. First, Boaz offers him only the attractive part. Naomi, he says, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. You are the nearest redeemer. If you want to redeem it, buy it. It is good farmland, a solid addition to a man's estate, and the nearer kinsman does exactly what you would expect. He says yes. I will redeem it. Easy. Land is land. And then Boaz springs it. On the day you buy the land from Naomi, he says, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to raise up the name of the dead on his inheritance. In other words, the land does not come alone. It comes with the obligation to marry the Moabite widow and father a son who will inherit that very land in the dead man's name. So the field you just agreed to buy will not even end up belonging to your family. It will pass to the heir of a dead man. And there is that word one more time, Moabite, dropped at the exact moment it will do the most damage to the rival's enthusiasm. And you can almost watch the man's face fall. Suddenly the deal is not a bargain. It is a money pit. He would pay to redeem land that would never be his, take on a foreign wife, and endanger his own estate and his own children's inheritance for the sake of another man's name. So he backs out on the spot. I cannot redeem it, he says, or I would ruin my own inheritance. You take it, Boaz, redeem it yourself. And with those words, he clears the only obstacle between Ruth and the man who actually wants her. But the law required one more thing to make it binding. A strange little ceremony involving a single sandal. Here the book pauses to explain a custom that was already old and fading even when the story was written down, which tells you how ancient this all is. In earlier times in Israel, the narrator says, to finalize a transaction of redemption, one party would take off his sandal and hand it to the other. That was how you sealed a deal. A sandal, passed from one hand to another in front of witnesses, made it legal and final. So the nearer redeemer takes off his sandal and he hands it to Boaz. And with that quiet, almost humble gesture, the man gives up his claim. The land, the widow, the whole obligation, and the future that came with it, all of it passes to Boaz. The rival keeps his estate and his comfort and steps out of the story forever, unnamed. The text never even tells us his name. He is the man who did the sensible thing, and the sensible thing wrote him out of history. Meanwhile, Boaz, who took the risk and the cost, is about to be remembered for 3,000 years. Then Boaz stands up in front of the whole gathering and makes it official. You are witnesses today, he says, that I have bought all that belonged to Elimelech and his sons from Naomi, And I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead on his inheritance, so that his name will not disappear from among his family and from the gate of his hometown. He redeems the land, and he redeems the woman, and he does it out loud, with pride, in front of the entire town. No hiding. He wants everyone to know. And then the townspeople and the elders answer with a blessing. And this is where the story quietly reaches forward and touches the future in a way first-time readers never catch. May the Lord, they say, make this woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. They are blessing Ruth, the Moabite outsider, by comparing her to the great mothers of the entire nation. That alone is astonishing, folding her into the founding family of Israel with a sentence. But they keep going. And may your house, they say, be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Now stop, because that reference is not random, and it is doing something sly. Perez and Tamar. If you go back to Genesis, Tamar is another woman with a scandalous, irregular story, a widow who was denied her rights by Judah, her father-in-law, and who took a bold and risky gamble to secure a child and a future, much as Ruth just did. Tamar was an outsider to the family too, and her son Perez became a key ancestor of the tribe of Judah. The elders of Bethlehem, blessing Boaz and Ruth, reach back and name exactly the earlier scandalous woman whose bold act also produced a crucial link in this bloodline. They are telling you, without telling you, that this is the third or fourth time God has built the royal line through a woman the world would have written off. It is a pattern, and it is about to become the most important pattern in the Bible. So Boaz takes Ruth as his wife. The foreign widow who arrived with nothing, who gleaned in the corners of the field, who risked everything on a threshing floor, is now the wife of one of the most respected men in Bethlehem. And soon the text says, the Lord gave her a pregnancy, and she bore a son. Which sounds like the happy ending. A wedding, a baby, roll credits. But the book of Ruth is not actually a love story, and it never was. The birth of that baby is not the ending. It is the whole reason the book exists, because of who that baby turns out to be the grandfather of. When the baby is born, the story does something you would never expect, and it is deeply moving once you catch it. The women of Bethlehem gather around, and they do not congratulate Ruth. They congratulate Naomi. Blessed be the Lord, they say to the old woman who once told them to call her bitter, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And they say something extraordinary about the child. A son has been born to Naomi. A son has been born to Naomi, not to Ruth, who carried and bore him, to Naomi. Because remember the whole point of the Redeemer, this child legally continues the line of Naomi's dead husband and dead son. He fills the emptiness Naomi stood in the street and wept about. The woman who came home empty, who said the Lord had taken everything from her, is sitting with a grandson in her lap and a full house again. The book has quietly answered her bitterness. She called herself Mara, bitter, because she came back empty, and now the town is telling her she is full. And notice what happens to Ruth here, because it is quietly beautiful and a little heartbreaking. Ruth, the heroine, the one whose loyalty drove this entire story, steps back into the shadows at the very end. The women praise her in one breathtaking line. They tell Naomi that her daughter-in-law, who loves her, is worth more to her than 7 sons, which in that culture was the highest praise a woman could receive. But then Ruth goes quiet. She has done what she set out to do. She kept her vow. She redeemed the family. And like so much true loyalty, once the work is done, it does not stand around demanding credit. It just quietly hands the future to the people it loved. And then the women name the baby, and they call him Obed. And Obed, the text tells us in the very last lines, in a burst of information that reframes the entire book you have just watched, Obed became the father of Jesse, and Jesse became the father of David. David, King David, the shepherd boy who killed Goliath, the greatest king in the history of Israel, the man who united the kingdom, who wrote the Psalms whose throne God promised would last forever. That David, the grandson of Obed, the great-grandson of Ruth the Moabite and Boaz of Bethlehem. Suddenly, the whole quiet little book snaps into focus, and you realize what you have actually been reading. This was never just a sweet story about grain and loyalty. It was the secret origin of the royal house of Israel. It was the answer to a question nobody thought to ask. Where did King David come from? And the answer is, he came from a famine and a foreign widow's loyalty, and one honorable man's willingness to redeem what everyone else walked away from. And the book ends with a formal little genealogy spelled out generation by generation, running from an ancestor named Perez, remember, the son of Tamar, all the way down through Boaz and Obed and Jesse to David. The writer wants there to be no doubt. He is laying the receipts on the table. This Moabite woman, the one the law of Deuteronomy said could not enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation, is the great-grandmother of the king God chose to build a dynasty on. The outsider is at the root of the throne. But the book of Ruth stops at David. And for a Jewish reader 3,000 years ago, David was already the mountaintop, the highest the story could possibly climb. What none of them could have known is that the genealogy does not actually stop there. Because 1,000 years later, another writer would pick up this exact same list and carry it forward and place Ruth's name into a family tree that ends not with a king on a throne, but with a baby in a manger. Open the New Testament, and the very first thing you hit before the Christmas story, before anything, is a genealogy. Matthew begins his gospel with the family tree of Jesus, a record of the generations from Abraham to the Messiah. And to most modern readers, it is the boring part, a wall of names you skim to get to the good stuff. But to a first-century Jewish reader, this list was the good stuff. It was the credential. It was proof of who this Jesus was and what line he came from. And buried in that list, Matthew does something a careful ancient reader would have found genuinely shocking. He names women. Ancient genealogies were lists of fathers, son of son of son of man after man after man. Women were almost never included, but Matthew stops 4 times in the stretch before David and inserts a woman into the line. And these are not the women you would pick if you were trying to make the Messiah's ancestry look respectable. Watch who he chooses. The first is Tamar, the woman who disguised herself to secure a child from her father-in-law, Judah, a scandal. The second is Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute of Jericho, an outsider and an enemy saved by her faith. The third is Ruth, the Moabite, from the nation the law shut out by name. And the fourth Matthew does not even name directly. He calls her the wife of Uriah, which is his pointed way of reminding you that she was Bathsheba, the woman King David took in adultery after arranging her husband's death. 4 women, and every single one of them is either a foreigner or caught in a scandal, or both. Not one of them is the safe, respectable Israelite matriarch you would expect at the root of the Messiah. And there, third in that startling little list, is Ruth. The book that seemed to end at David actually reaches all the way here to the first page of the Gospel and sets a Moabite widow into the ancestry of Jesus of Nazareth, which means the whole tension we started with, the law of Deuteronomy that said no Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord to the 10th generation, does not just get bent for one woman on the edge of Israel. It gets answered permanently at the deepest possible level. The Moabite is not merely let in, she is planted in the bloodline of the Messiah himself, honored by name, at the front of the New Testament, forever. Now, faithful readers of the Hebrew Bible noticed this collision a long time ago, the law that bars Moabites against the book that crowns one, and the old rabbis wrestled with it seriously. One traditional way they reconciled it was to read the ban narrowly, arguing the wording targeted Moabite men, not Moabite women, so that a woman like Ruth was never actually excluded. Whether or not you find that reading convincing, notice what it shows. Even the guardians of the law felt the force of this story. They knew Ruth was a problem for a flat reading of the rules, and they knew which one had to give. The story of a real woman's loyalty was stronger than the letter of a law written to keep her people out. And that is the deep thing this book was quietly built to say all along. Ruth is proof, sitting right there in the ancestry of the king and of the Messiah, that the line of promise was never about pure blood or the right passport. It ran through a Canaanite and a Moabite, and more than one scandal on purpose. It was always, from the beginning, wide enough to take in the outsider who came in faith and stayed in loyalty. And there is one more quiet detail that makes the point unmistakable. To this day, in Jewish tradition, the entire book of Ruth is read out loud every year at the festival of Shavuot, the celebration of the wheat harvest, and of Israel receiving the law at Sinai. The story of the outsider who chose to belong is read on the very feast that celebrates the covenant. She is not a footnote to the law, she is read as its heart. So the question we started with has an answer now, and it turned out to be bigger than the question. How did Ruth influence the lineage of Jesus? She did not just influence it, she is in it. A famine, a wrong direction journey, 3 graves, 1 impossible vow on a road, a chance field that was no chance at all, a wing spread on a threshing floor, a sandal handed over at a gate, and a baby laid in an old woman's lap. Every one of those had to happen exactly as it did, or David is never born, and the family tree at the front of the Gospel of Matthew reads a completely different way. We started in a town called the House of Bread that had no bread, and a family that made the desperate wrong direction choice to leave it. And it would have been so easy for this to be a story that just disappeared. A minor famine, a refugee family that mostly died out, a foreign widow nobody had any reason to remember. That is how these things usually go. People vanish from the record all the time, and history never notices. But this one did not vanish, because the whole point of the book of Ruth, the thing it was quietly building the entire time, is that the biggest story in the Bible runs straight through the smallest people in it. A destitute foreign widow, gleaning in the corners of somebody else's field, turns out to be standing at the exact spot the royal line, and then the line of the Messiah, has to pass through. Nobody in Bethlehem watching Ruth pick up dropped grain had the faintest idea they were looking at the great-grandmother of their greatest king. The people the world overlooks are so often the ones the whole future is secretly resting on. That is the whole reason this channel exists. To open the book back up and read what is actually on the page, the Hebrew words, the ancient customs, the connections the picture books leave out, and to find that the real story is almost always deeper and stranger and better than the flattened version we were handed. Ruth was not a gentle side character. She was a Moabite who outloved the whole covenant and got written into the family tree of God as a reward. So if watching this made you see even one familiar name in a new way, subscribe, because the family tree we just climbed is full of these hidden people, and next we are staying right in this bloodline and going back one more link, to the woman the elders of Bethlehem invoked at the gate. The scandalous, brilliant, almost unbelievable story of Tamar and Judah, and the risk she took that put her too into the ancestry of the Messiah. And the video on screen right now pulls another one of these hidden threads out of the same pages. Go ahead and click it. I think you will want to see where this one leads.